This is U.S. History Regents Review, Unit 4, Video Number 1. In this unit, we are going to take a look at the problems that were created by industrialization and then the movement that tried to fix all of these problems. This movement is called the Progressive Movement. It's a reform movement. And we're going to look at the presidents who led some of these policy changes. Then we're going to switch and look at imperialism and foreign policy. So while the progressive movement's happening at home, imperialism and American expansion is happening abroad. And then we're going to finish with World War I. So first of all, the progressive era. This is a big reform movement that's taking place from around the start of the 1890s to about the 1920s. And the goal is to fix the social, political, and economic problems of society. We would consider this to be a very optimistic reform movement. The people who are involved are mostly educated professionals, and they believed in trying to use the power of government and the power of human expertise, the scientific method, understanding how things work to fix society by passing laws and changing the environment. So they're trying to take scientific solutions to problems and passing lots of legislation to get things done. These ideas influenced all of politics. So this is not just about one group of people, but we see progressive ideas being adopted by both Republicans and Democrats. And then eventually Theodore Roosevelt is the one who creates a separate progressive party. And that political party plays a role for a couple decades. They're also influenced, I would mention, by the Populist Party. That's the first big popular reform movement that we saw that was mostly farmers and workers. So this is a bit different in that it's a different group of people, again, like the middle class and the educated, who are trying to fix up society. So let's go back and look at the issues that need to be addressed during this time. So from the last unit, you saw rapid industrialization of the country created really crowded cities, such as New York City, that struggled with sanitation, crime, and poor housing. Because of industrialization, the environment is being destroyed. There's an overuse of resources and ultimately a lot of pollution. City, state, local governments are corrupt. There's concern over the safety of consumer goods. What are people actually eating and consuming? Are these products safe? Immigrants are coming over in large numbers, and there's concern about them learning English and adjusting to the United States, and issues over where they're living. Big businesses that have grown incredibly large have an incredible power over the government and economy, and people start to criticize that power and want to regulate them. Workers, meanwhile, as we looked at last unit, are struggling really to have basic rights to wages, their own safety, a limit on their hours. So that movement really continues at this time and starts to gain some success finally. And then women and African Americans lacked basic rights. So we're going to kind of go through this issue by issue to get a sense of what people were doing about all of these things that I just described. So first of all, corruption in the cities. A term you need to know, political machines. Political machines operated in pretty much every major city in the United States, which operated mainly through using what's called a patronage system. It's like kind of like the spoils system we talked about before. And this is where you give government jobs to supporters. And political machines are these groups of people who all work together and kind of agree to be corrupt together. It runs through bribes, through kickbacks. All this is stealing money from the taxpayers. They gain their power and keep it partially from having really corrupt voting practices. So that would include stuffing ballot boxes, intimidation, having people dress in a different outfit and go vote again. If you take a look over at this political cartoon, you'll see an example of this kind of corruption. This is Boss Tweed. He is the most famous of the political machine bosses who ran the one in New York City called Tammany Hall. And here he is by the ballot box, leaning there, looking really intimidating. And it says, "In counting, there is strength." That's what's the matter. So, literally at polling places, there would be intimidation to guarantee that people voted a certain way. And one way that they would convince people to support them is by playing a big role in immigrant communities. So people would get off the boat and somebody from Tammany Hall would show up and say, "Hey, I can help you get a job. I can help you find a house." And then there's an expectation that when it comes time to vote, that they're going to vote for people in Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall specifically is Democratic, so it's for the Democrat Party. Um, and again, Boss Tweed is the most famous of these leaders, but he was certainly not the only one. He was famous for being just super corrupt, stealing a lot of money from the taxpayers, but eventually was taken down by Thomas Nast. Was one of the people. He was a cartoonist and an example of a muckraker who drew these cartoons to show the public just what kind of corruption was going on. So here, these are both Thomas Nast cartoons. The second one, again, it shows you Tammany Ring. And literally you have a ring of people all pointing the finger at somebody else. So you don't know who's involved because they're blaming each other. But the person at the end of the line, anyone reading the cartoon would understand, was Boss Tweed. Always depicted as being this like big fat guy. So they maintained their power in the cities for a really long time. And again, it's because they actually did provide a lot of support to immigrants and other poor people. They were seen as defending the working class, even though anyone who was educated also understood that they were stealing money and just really continuing corruption in these cities. So, what do you do about these things? You need to have democratic reforms to address these problems. So, first of all, we're going to talk about a bunch of these people called muckrakers. Now, literally, if you listen to the sound of that word, raking up the muck. So these are people, they're investigative journalists who are digging up the dirt of society. They're exposing these problems through their journalism, which included photojournalism, it included articles, it included books. One famous example is Lincoln Steffens' Shame of the Cities, where he talked about political corruption in cities. We just talked about Thomas Nast. And once people realize there are problems, they want things to be fixed. This led legislators to try to fix these problems. So one of the first big acts, this is a federal law called the Pendleton Act, tried to fix this problem by requiring civil service exams for federal workers. So instead of patronage, where you get a job for being a loyal supporter, you actually get the job based on merit by doing well on an exam. And then other states adopt similar laws. One of the most famous progressives of the era, one of the most famous leaders in a state government, was actually the governor of Wisconsin, Robert La Follette. And he is pictured over here, really advocated for reforms. He eventually ran for president under the Progressive Party later in the 20s. There are several different reforms. I don't know if you would need to know all the specifics of these necessarily on the test, but you would need to know that altogether, their goal is to increase the power of the people and to get rid of corruption in state and local government. So if you look over here on the right, you'll see that these are the lists of what these things are. So initiative is the ability for average citizens to propose laws. Referendum is where the state will let a voter vote directly on a law, yes or no. And a recall is when you can actually remove someone from office by popular vote, somebody who's been a bad politician. Secret ballots are where it's basically a secret of who you're voting for. It used to be that political parties printed out their tickets on certain colors, so you knew obviously what party everyone was voting for. So let's make that secret instead. And then direct primaries is where you vote for a political party. the candidate directly.